Salute! Good morning. Hope everybody's well. Like my new shirt. I'm sure you people think I'm just a straight hater, but I'm not. Just a little irritated with how things are going in the world right now, but you know, I like funny shirts. This one cracks me up, and I can understand it. At any rate, got my cold brew. Still loving my Ninja. Gonna be kind of a common theme here today. You know, this, and it's not anger meant in a malicious way, but I felt it was time to finally reshoot the video for one of my, probably the streamer that everybody knows me for, the Headbanger sculpin. So I'm actually going to do a series of 4 of these at some point. Whether I do them all in succession, I don't know. But 2 of which, out of the 4, you've not. I take that back. It'd be 5. It'd be 5. There's 5 versions of this fly, and it's all based on size. So there'll be 2 out of the 5 that you've never seen me detail before in video. I'm not going to do that one today. Sorry. I am going to do the, I guess you could say, the smaller articulated version today, which is probably the one that most people fish because the large helmets are just problematic for anybody who's not a mediocre to advanced caster. Put it that way. But if you were to ask me which size I would fish the most, it would be that 4.5 to 5 inch size streamer with the larger helmet, just because it gets down quick. So you've heard me talk about this before. One of the reasons, and listen, there's a million different sculpin headed streamers out there now. The head on that is what basically gives you the motion that you're looking for. Some of them are good, some are better than others. There's some easy ones. The one that I designed, I don't think that this is, you know, this is the only sculpin you should ever have, but you know, it's proven itself as a very, very effective pattern. It's a little bit more time consuming. It's right on the edge of what I would call practical. I've been tying so many of these things that I got these dialed down to a pretty good pace. But for me, it's right at that line of, all right, if a fly takes me more than, it takes me up to 10 minutes, it's just not practical for me. So, you know, I can tie these much quicker than that. I can do one of these articulated ones in probably about 6 minutes if I'm just going straight through it. That's with prepping the materials, etc. But the effectiveness of the pattern is why I will always continue to tie this fly. So I will do this one today in the original, and probably if I only had one color to fish, it would absolutely 100% be this color scheme that we're going to tie today. It's an olive and black, very, very reminiscent, and it's a dark olive. It's not your regular olive, it's a dark olive, which is very, very much the same color of a lot of your sculpins that you'll find in many of your watersheds. So the rivers that I frequent in my neck of the woods, the sculpins take on 2 colors. They're either this really dark olivey black for the slimy sculpins, or they're a tan to ginger colored sculpin. And that's, their color is 100% indicative of the bottom that they inhabit. They will change colors. So those are the 2 color schemes that I probably tie and fish the most. However, there's a litany of other color schemes you can use. You know, if you've got dirty water and you need something that's going to stick out, you know, you could use yellows, you can use chartreuse, you can put reds, you can put black and purples. There's all these different color schemes, let's face it, that can all work at very different times. And a lot of those color schemes don't represent the natural forage. So there's like 2 schools of thought in fly fishing. And this is the cool thing about fly fishing and tying, is you have this whole group right here that's all about 100%, everything's like matching the hatch, whether it's bugs all the way to forage fish, crustaceans, you name it. We got to have something that's an exact match. And then there's this other side that's like suggestive. And you know what? Both sides work. So you find what works for you. That is the fun thing about tying. So it doesn't always have to be an exact match. I'll give you a funny story, and Joe might not like this now, But my first time meeting Joe Goodspeed was on the Delaware watershed well over a decade ago. We crossed paths while fishing. And Joe, he errs more on the side of exact match, try to replicate whatever food forms those fish are chasing or eating. And that works for Joe. Joe is a fish catching machine. He's probably, all the people that I know and variety of species, that guy probably catches more big fish than anybody else I know. And that's tough for me to say because I like to chase big trout too and big fish, and I've got my fair share, and we all do. Our ego kind of gets in the way. But Joe's mindset with stuff is matching the hatch, direct matches. And that was indicative that when he showed me his fly box that day, because everything in his fly box was one of two colors for his nymphs. They were either some sort of olive or brown shade, representing whatever he was fishing with or for forage on that particular watershed. So it's good to have a little bit of both. And the funny thing was, that day I was catching all my fish, and in fact I had just released a double tight lining on excuse me, fishing a hotspot Frenchie, which represents absolutely nothing. Water type, right? So some of that stuff kind of holds true with streamer fishing too. Kind of got off on a little bit of a tangent here, but I'm going to reel it back in. That's the beauty of all this tying stuff. So some of you probably already hit stop play on this and have moved on. But I will tell you this. When it comes to certain streamer styles, this particular fly I get the most questions on, without a doubt, because there's some other videos out there where instead of using foxtail, Arctic foxtail, which I tell you why I use this, because it has more body. It breathes like marabou and it moves, but it has more body and mass to it, as opposed to some that are tied with craft fur. I told you, I'm not a purist on, you have to make sure that the recipe on these flies is exact, but there's definitely you have to have some similarities and properties with the materials that you're going to substitute. And I can't stress this more with this. This stuff is not this, and this is not this. So, although your headbangers may catch fish well with this, they will not maintain their profile that this does, if that makes sense. So, if you want, you can have some of both. But with this particular fly pattern, I utilize this material for a very specific reason, and you'll see why today. So enough of my ranting. I'll get off that soapbox a bit. The other thing too is I can't tell you, I get questions on this on a monthly basis, if not weekly. And it's not just with this particular pattern. It comes down a lot with articulated streamers in general. And I know my friend Matt, my friend Mike, who also tie streamers for a living, like myself here, they get the same questions all the time too when it comes to connections. And, I bought this fly, it's your pattern, but it's not swimming right. Well, I'm not familiar with your name and I didn't sell you that fly pattern, so where did you get it from? And then the story goes from there, and then when we take a look at the fly and we delve into it, the connections aren't tied correctly. So the fly doesn't swim right. So I'll detail that again today. I've done it 1,000 times. You guys have seen it all. But I like to harp on it because there's definitely some things when you're tying these style of flies that you want to make sure you get right. So enough of my complaining. That's good cold brew. And now we're going to get down to tying this little guy. So here's the first in a series of 5. This is going to show you how to tie this fly properly, and then we'll go from there. All right? Let's have at it. All right, folks. First things first. So you've probably already noticed, and I'm talking to you as I'm looking through stuff, that there's something a little bit different on here, isn't there? There's not a hook in that vise. Well, I'm going to appease to the crowd on the tail on this. I'm only going to put one hook in it. So a majority of the places that I fish, you really only need that one up front anyway, but you can always change the configuration. If you're going to put a hook in the rear, this is a number 4 Airex TP610. You could use this. The shank is almost about the same length. slightly shorter. But if you're going to do two hooks on this, this would be the one I'm going to use. But this is going to be my rear portion here. One of the places I fished down in Chile, we've kind of come to the determination that you only really need one hook, and usually it's either in the rear or the front, most likely in the front. So we've been doing these with shanks on the back. So thread we're going to use is just a Vivis 140 in olive. First thing I'm going to do is I've got to close this gap on here for this particular shank to get it to work. What I'm going to do, as you'll see here, is I kind of take my thread that's hanging at a 45-degree angle as I've started my thread right back here at the eye of the shank, and then kind of slip it through here. Once I've done that and I've got a little bit of purchase, then I just take and tighten it up like so and close that return. What I will warn you, some of you have probably tied with these and you've had fits with your thread breaking and all this other nonsense. Sometimes when they cut these, they leave a burr on there and it's sharp and it will shred your thread. So my suggestion is I always keep some sort of a file. Of course, when you're tying in mass like I do, something like this on my bench, so I can file these things down and get any burrs off there. You can do the same thing with the helmets, because the helmets sometimes will have the same. But anyway, I digress. We're going to start with some flash. So here is half of a piece of the Magnum Olive Flashaboo, and it's that holographic. So I take, and I say half, you take one piece, cut it in half, then fold it in half, cut it, grab it in the middle. On the near side, take a few turns going forward, fold it over to the rear, and then when I go to cut this, I want this to be just outside the end of my tail. So it's probably a couple inches long. Just clip it like so, and then do that. And then I'm going to advance my thread right about to the point where you'll see that burr or the return starts on that. So this is a smaller version of the Headbanger sculpin. This one's only going to be about 3 1/4 to 3.5 inches long. This is the size, like I said, that most people are the most comfortable fishing with from the articulated versions, because we're going to be using the smaller helmet of the two. But what you'll find is, you know, the tail that's made up on this, which is the most time-consuming part to tie, is basically 2 colors of marabou tied in at the tips and palmered forward. Now, the length on this marabou, as you get down towards this part of the stem, is much longer than what I'm going to need to keep the proportions correct on this fly. So in order for me to do that, I'm going to start at about that midway point. So I take the 2 tips of the 2 feathers together, and it's just like doing a steelhead popsicle. Just like so. Take your fingers, wet that. Tie that just like so. Trim the butt ends off. You can use your rotary function, but I think you have a little bit more control this way. That way you can pick those fibers out as you go. But by starting my tail way up here, what you'll find also is when we go to wrap backwards, those fibers are going to be just the right length. Now, listen, you don't need to use 2 different colors of marabou like I am and wrapping them this way. You can use straight colored, like 1 color of marabou. You know, even a bugger marabou would work great for this. It's entirely up to you. But I like the way that these 2 colors together give the tail a mottled effect like a real sculpin. Then what I'm going to do is, once I get to there, is come in my scissors just to separate those feathers. Go over it a couple of times, front a couple times. That binds it in place. Trim that off. If you've got any errant fibers in there that are kind of wound up together, now's the time to pick them out. And then we're just going to wrap back over this, as you'll see here, right back to the base of where that shank flutes out. Now, you notice there's a round end, and these are offset by 90 degrees on the shank. I'll show you here so you can kind of visualize what I'm talking about. What you're going to see is there's a large end here that's cupped, and then if you turn it 90 degrees, you have your circular end. So this, obviously, if you were to hook this through another one and make a daisy chain like a game changer, that's what that's for. This is where you're going to be tying this into. The questions come up, well, why don't you just take one of these and tie it onto the back of the hook and you can use it as your connection? You absolutely could, but I don't like the way that looks. So, and I don't like the way it swims either. So we're still going to use a wire connection on this. But that's how that works. So don't be too concerned about any of this junk in here, because this is all going to get covered up. Next thing we're going to do is I've already pre-selected 2 sculpin feathers. So when you're building this fly, it's all about taper. So if you notice, this one here is thinner. This one here is wider. This one goes up near the front, near the head. This one goes near the tail. Alright? So remember, mass towards the tail gets thinner, more flow, etc. You got it. So I'm going to take this guy, and I've already prepped it, and I want this to, when I palmer it, just like palmering a woolly bugger, I want those fibers to lay rearward, but it's going to gradually get larger as you go forward. So what you'll do is you'll take a look at your sculpin feather. When I preen those fibers, they've got a cupped shape to them. So if you look at them from the front here, they're kind of cupped, right? So like this, I want that facing down against the fly as I tie it in. You can clip this off right here, and all you need to do is just catch that right there. Then we're going to take some medium olive Cactus Chenille. I will warn you, some of the last few batches of this were larger than normal, bushier. Some of you can relate to this. You want the thinner stuff. So I'm just going to wrap back over the butt ends of that, come up just behind the eye. You'll do this by hand instead of using the rotary function. If I'm tying these in mass, I'm cranking these out with the rotary function on my vise. Wrap every so many, like 2 or 3 turns, give it a little tug, and that's going to lock it into place. Once you get it behind that eye, 2 turns over, couple in front, trim it off. Alright? And then I go back over it so that I have a space to set up my thread head. And you'll see I always get in the habit of putting a half hitch on there. I know that drives some people crazy, but if you tie utilizing the rotary function on your vise, you'll understand why. Because if you don't do that, things are going to fall apart. So now we're just going to palmer that sculpin feather forward. And as you'll see here, while doing so, what do you think happens? Done correctly, it's going to get progressively wider profile as you get closer to the eye. 2 turns over, 1 in front, trim that off. Same thing. Go back over that, put another half hitch there. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to take 1 barred crazy leg in olive green flake. This is what I would call bin appeal stuff, and just add some modeling. It's an accessory, you don't need it, but I put it in there because it looks good. So I take 1, fold it in half, cut it, grab it in the middle, put it right on top. Take 2 turns, 1, 2, okay? So it's kind of X, just like you do with a leg. Pull 1 towards the near side, 1 towards the far side, just like you see here. Then I'm going to take and fold them rearward, the ones that are facing forward, like so. Half hitch it. Now if you want, if you're super anal and you got 1 leg that's longer than the other, you can kind of just go in here and trim them to length so they're all the same. Real quick. Now, to make our wing on this, we're going to use Arctic foxtail. So less is more. And you always want to use the smaller stuff on this. So if I can, I get in here and I take a look at where my shorter fibers are. This is a decent tail, it's not, and this is only part of it. You're going to take about a pencil's width of this stuff. Go right in at the hide, trim it, get your flea comb out, tie him a bucktail, let's take a bucktail of mine, and you're going to comb out all that under fur. You'll see you're going to get a lot. Do it on both the butt and the tips. Now when you go to tie this, I generally want that wing to bleed into about the midpoint of that tail. So this hair, as you can see here, is way too long, right? So I'm going to go in here, trim it just like that. Reverse it, because we're going to reverse tie this, just like you see here. be too concerned if you come down on the eye, because I'll show you why in a second, and just go right over the ends of that stuff. Alright? Then you're going to take, I use a little piece of clear tubing. It usually comes with a pair of scissors. Just fold that rearward, just like you see here. And then we're just going to barrel tie right over it. Take a couple of turns, and then you can do either a hand whip finish like I'm doing here, or you can use your whip finish tool. Whatever works best for you. About a 4 turn. Boom. Trim that off. And then I like to put some Solaris Bone Dry on the thread wraps. These are like lures, so I want to make sure these things last. So I've done that. Get your 2 torches. Give her a cure. The rear section of this fly is done. Now, because we're using wire, I always do this. I get in the habit of doing this because I tie production. So take my wire, and you'll see it's got a natural curvature to it. I want it going that way because that's how I'm going to bend it. Take it by the 2 ends, pull it. That puts a little notch in there. And then while you're at it, you can get your 1 bead that you're going to put in here to separate it. Pile that right on there, and then set it aside. You get the rear portion of your fly done. That's it. Alright? Alright, so now we're going to put our front hook in the vise. This is a Airex TP610. In the original version of this particular fly, I use a Gamakatsu SP11 in the rear and a B10S up front. But lately I've been using these 2 hooks. Listen, they're all equally as good. It's completely what you want to use. Alright, so these have been pretty good. Been very happy with how they hold up. So this is a number 2. If I was going to do this with 2 hooks, I'd have the 2 up front and a number 4 in the rear. Alright, so first thing I'm going to do is just take my thread again, start right at the eye, and I'm going to build the thread base right down to where the bend starts, which is key. Alright, I don't want to get my thread down into this bend, and I've seen this before. It's a real easy mistake, because then when you go to tie in your connection, and this is one of the questions I've had to answer before. Well, why does this thing swim right? It doesn't even look right. It's because somebody's tied the connection down into the bend, and instead of the fly being straight like you'll see here in a few moments, it's like this, and it's way down here. Of course it's not going to swim right. Alright, that's one key mistake. Next one here is, and listen, there's a million different schools of thought, and I'm exaggerating when I say a million, on what you can use for connections on these. I've tried and true. I have not swayed from this in well over 15 years. I'm all about the Beetle-On, and I've had some questions on this before. Durability. Listen, nothing's perfect. If you fish a lot, I have some of these flies that have been in my repertoire for a couple of seasons. Dozens of fish on them. Dozens and dozens of outings. Some of them the paint scraped off the helmets. But what you will find is if you do catch a fish and you have a hook on the back of this, sometimes if you get a really big fish and they twist and turn and do that gator roll, it's going to twist this wire up. It's inevitable. It's not going to last forever. If I told you, oh yeah, it's never going to break, I'd be full of it. You guys know that. Come on now. But from my experience, this stuff's been super durable. Look, I've put browns up to 20 pounds on these things. I think that speaks for itself. So, I use wire. You can use mono, use whatever you want, but I like this Beetle-On wire. This is the exact stuff I use on all the trout streamers right here. Take note. So, big thing is, we want to make sure this is the top of our fly, which remember, the hook's inverted, which that's a whole other topic I'm not going to get into today. When we go to tie these in, there's a little bit of a bend in the wire, so the one loop comes up the top, the other comes on the bottom. So when we go to tie this in, the 2 pieces of wire are going to be side by side on top of this hook. So, and I'm just going to clip this off because one side's a little longer than the other. 3 loose wraps, 1, 2, 3, and then I can pull that in place. I don't want to close that loop up. I want it to leave it open like so, because that's going to give me maximum movement in the tail. Got it? Once I've got that in place, what you're going to see here, if you can kind of tell, the 2 pieces of wire together on top of the hook, kind of like my fingers are right here. They don't want them twisted. I don't want one under the other, because that's going to change the tail. 2 together like so. And then I'm just going to advance my thread over these as I go forward. this first course of thread is going to have a medium amount of pressure. Once I've gone over the end of that wire, this is key. You got to watch out with this stuff. If this wire's got a burr in it, when you go to tie it off, it's going to fray your thread. The thread's going to break. So I'm always really, really cautious of how much pressure I put on there on that first course. Then as I go backwards, you'll see I'm not doing consecutive wraps. I'm open wrapping, but I'm putting more pressure on there because you can see the thread bending the hook. Come back to here, and then I come forward again with even more pressure. Same thing. And then that last course is the most amount of pressure that I put on there. Real quick. That literally takes like 3 or 4 seconds to do when you're doing it full speed. Okay? That's not going anywhere. Now I get this out of the way so I don't have to worry about it. Next thing I'm going to do is the same steps again. So now I'm going to take my marabou plumes. This is just to build my inner collar. And I'm going to set these aside really, really well. One last thing I want to tell you though, because I found this nifty little tool at the Hobby Lobby, is, and this way you won't wreck your good scissors on cutting this wire, is this awesome little tool by, it looks like Xuron. And it's basically a pair of wire cutters that catches the wire. So when you go to cut it, as you see here, it holds it. It doesn't go flying. See how that held that wire there? And you don't wreck your scissors. And you get a clean cut every time. Best piece of equipment that I found recently. Alright, so back to my tying here. So I'm going to take, same thing like I did before. I'm going to take my 2 pieces of marabou. And you're only going to need about 3 turns on here. 3 or 4. Wet it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Take the 2 together by the stem. We're just going to wrap it. 3. I take a look at it. Probably like 4, 5. Perfect. That's it. Take your fingers. Come in on the side. 2, 4. Trim over it. Take a look at what you got. And then just fold that rearward. And then this is just going to kind of cover up that connection a little bit. Take your thread right back to there. That's it. Now you should have another half of that flash left over from before. You're not going to need all of it. This is just to add a little bit of that olive flash into the middle of the fly like we did before. So I take the 2 pieces together, just like you see here, cut them in half, tie them on the near side, fold 2 to the far side, and then I got a little bit of inner flash in there, not a lot. Now we go right back to what we're doing. We take that larger slapping feather, just like we did before. Cut that off. 1 turn. Take our Cactus Chenille like we did. Tie that in, and we're going to stop. So when you've never tied with these helmets, you got to kind of know where your head's going to start. I've done so many of these, I know exactly where. And you're going to want to come up into there where that head's going to be, because you want to build up some space and fill the gap in there. But I'll show you why in a moment. You don't want to go right up to the eye. That's another common mistake on a lot of these when people tie with this kind of stuff or use any kind of head to put on there. So I'm just going to, let me go back. I forgot to tighten that up a little bit. 1 turn, tighten it. 2 again. Tighten it again. There we go. Wrap that off. 2 over, 2 in front. Tie it off. Half hitch it so it doesn't come undone. And then, same thing. Just going to wrap my schlappen feather. Just like you see here. And I don't know if you noticed what I just did, which was different from the rear. But I went in a different direction. And I'll tell you why. So, if you saw what happened here, sometimes these feathers will have a tendency to have a mind of their own. So when I first started to wrap this schlappen feather, I don't know if you noticed, when I wrapped it towards me, it started to roll over. And now, instead of the fibers laying rearward, they'd be laying forward. Not that big of a deal, but aesthetically it is. So if you go to wrap and palmer that feather and the fibers are moving in the wrong direction, if you reverse the course that you're going to tie that in, or the direction that you're wrapping it, typically, more often than not, it'll get those fibers to wrap in the direction you want. Now, same thing. Take that barred crazy leg, cut it in half. 2 turns on top, right down the center. We're going to take that one, pull it off to the other side, one to that side. Take 1 turn over the rear, fold those 2 so they're facing rearward, just like you see here. I'm going to half hitch that off, go in and trim them to length. Now I'm going to invert this because this is important. Remember, this is a sculpin. It's a bottom-dwelling swimless fish with no swim bladder. So I want this fly to relatively be oriented towards the bottom. So if I have to bounce it off the bottom or hop it or skip it or do whatever, I want my hook inverted so that it doesn't snag bottom. I'm going to cut my fox hair. Same thing. I want that fox hair to bleed into that midsection. Now I know there's some schools of thought out there. There's people that are anti-inverted hooks because you can brain smaller fish. Yes, you're absolutely correct, especially if the hook's much larger. This is a smaller one, so it's less of an option, less of a problem, but it can still potentially happen. So I get where you're coming from if you're catch and release angler. Same thing, I measure this up, come in here, trim off the back, reverse it in my fingers, tie this on right here with about 6 or 7 turns just to make a little collar on here. It's about 1/8 of an inch. Bring it right back, and then be careful when you're doing this because you can impale your fingers. Just fold it rearward, and you'll kind of see what I want to do here is I want that hair to go 180 degrees. Boom. Half hitch it, right? Advance my thread in front. Then I'm going to take some Senyo's laser dub in an olive color for this. You're going to need 2 little bundles of this for this particular fly. I've already pre-selected them, just like you see here. Now we're going to take the 2 of these together because these are going to form the pec fins. Tie them right on the top, right down the center in the middle. 2 loose turns, pull straight down, a couple more, then you're just going to fold that stuff to either side like you see here, excuse me, and advance my thread in front. Put a half hitch, and then I'm going to whip finish this because I got to take my thread off and we're going to get the head on there, but I'll show you what we do next. So I've done that. Trim it. Get yourself a little brush. Take your brush, and then I comb out on either side those pec fins just like you see here. Okay? Pull out any loose fibers. The next thing I'm going to do is I take a pair of non-serrated pliers like you see here. From the top and to the bottom, I'm going to flatten out that bump where that Arctic fox is that I did that reverse, just like so. By doing that, if you can kind of see in there, that's flattened that out, and it's going to make it a heck of a lot easier for you to put this head on and prevent it from rolling. Because if you can kind of see in there, it's got a distinct oval shape to it. Right? Next thing I'm going to do, and I've already put my eyes on that head, is I'm just going to put a little drop of gel Loctite right in front of that bump. You can do it on the top or bottom if you want. Now one thing I will tell you is sometimes this front leading edge on these, and this one has one, will have a burr, and the second you go to put this thing on there, it's going to be sharp. When you go to put your thread back on there, the thread's going to get cut and frayed, and you're going to be cursing at Flyman Fishing Company for that. It's not their fault. Give them a break. So I always try and file that down first. I push this on, invert it, and then I'm just going to make sure that that goes right over the top of that bump. And you want to make sure you give yourself enough room when you do this to get your thread reattached. Okay? Just like so. Look like so. So remember, there's a distinct top and a bottom on this. This is keeled. It's got weight, so you want this on the bottom side of the hook. Hook point on the top. Then we're going to reattach our thread. Okay? Just to build a little bit of a thread dam in front. Once you've done that, half inch. Now I'm going to use my whip finish tool on this because I want this to be pretty precise, and I've got really fat fingers, so this works better for me. Do about a 4-turn whip finish, just like you see here. Builds a nice little pyramid on there. Then you're going to take, you can use regular head cement if you want, but I'm going to use some bone dry on the thread wraps to start. Let that sink in a little bit. Hit it with your torch. And then the next thing we're going to do is, I'm a big proponent of making these things last. We're going to take some thin Solares, and we're just going to put a little drop on here over each eye. And you want to make sure that that little drop seeps over onto the sculpin helmet. And then I also take a little bit and I'll go right over those thread wraps, just like you see here. That's going to help prolong the life of those eyes on there and your thread wraps. And then I just take 2 torches together, let them sit on there for about 10 seconds or so, and that fly's done. And you'll get a nice neat little thread head. Sometimes there'll be some abnormalities in there and how that thing sets in there, and you'll have like gaps and spaces and whatnot, but that's the fly right there. That's the little articulated headbanger. This one only has 1 hook on there, as you can see. That's kind of how that thing sits when you're fishing it. Okay, and you'll see this thing gets all kinds of movement and whatnot. And this is the one that, you know, even this size right here, you could throw this guy on a 3 or a 4 weight if you really had to. I like to fish the bigger ones personally, but there's definitely a time and a place on these. These things catch fish. That's the headbanger tied correctly. So I hope you guys like it. This is 5 videos I'm going to be doing on all the different sizes of these. So thanks for tuning in. There's the little headbanger, and have a good day, guys. Peace.